For over 40 months, Russia has waged war against Ukraine, and today we'll assess the military situation there. I'm Julian Robke, and this is BILD Situation Room. We begin in the southwest of Ukraine's Donetsk region, where the Russian offensive seems to be advancing without any significant slowdown. We have continuously reported over the past few days that new settlements and villages have fallen under Russian control. And today, we must also acknowledge that 2 more small villages have come under Russian control, and the areas still held by the Ukrainians have now significantly shrunk, leaving them with just 13 villages remaining in their possession. We're now viewing the footage, undoubtedly Russian propaganda. However, these are propaganda recordings that have been verified, where we can confidently say they actually depict what they claim to show. We start with the small village of Yalta and basically have these typical views that we've been seeing over and over again in the past weeks at the beginning. The large-scale bombardment with multiple rocket launchers. And just from this bombardment alone, we can already see no one can survive there, of course. That's also not what the Russians intended, for even a single civilian in quotes to be liberated there. And the Russian army says every day that they are liberating something here, but we can see from these massive intrusions across the entire village that it's completely uninhabitable for civilians anymore. That virtually everyone there would be killed long before the first Russian soldier could even set foot in that very area. Sets foot on the ground. We are now seeing the attack with heavy glide bombs by the Russian army of the FAB 500 type or even more powerful. Every house in Yalta is being struck by these larger bombs, and then, in the next phase, smaller units like kamikaze drones are deployed to move in and further escalate the intensity of the attack. Are sent in. Here we see it, the first kamikaze drones being sent in to essentially pave the way, if you will, for the Russian soldiers. Ukrainian vehicles are constantly under attack. We currently believe the Ukrainian army has completely withdrawn, leaving the field entirely to the Russians. I don't believe that's the situation at all, because we're observing ongoing and intense fighting over these villages, with each one currently being held and defended by a small group of Ukrainian soldiers, before it eventually falls into Russian hands. Now we're seeing the victory footage from Yalta again, and once more these images show us, unless they're extremely cleverly made with AI or something similar, showing that the Russian soldiers are indeed in Yalta. This is a tiny village, with about 3-4 streets of houses. Despite that, they've managed to settle there and have successfully taken over this small village in the area. And once again, it's clearly shown that the flag is being raised at every possible spot throughout the entire village. That is extremely important for the Russians, and we see once more just the fact that they can stand there, that they can wave, that they can let the flag fly without being attacked by drones or by fire from small arms, from handheld weapons of the Ukrainian army, shows that the Ukrainians have now completely withdrawn after these intense battles here. So, this is Yalta. We're now shifting our focus to footage from the nearby village of Shevchenkov, which isn't exactly adjacent but just a few kilometers away. We'll see it on the map shortly, and here's the usual footage of both Shevchenkov and Grusisdorf. Here's the Russian soldier who is just about to raise his flag on top of this building right now. And this village has also completely fallen under Russian control by now. And the whole thing is truly alarming for the Ukrainian army here. They're losing so many small settlements, so many villages, so many areas that there's really not much left in this region that they even have left to defend, but the battle is shifting. And as you can see, Shevchenkov, a larger place with about 10 streets and the respective houses, but that the battle will likely soon shift to the region Dnipropetrovsk, if the Russians decide to push forward and aren't satisfied with simply maintaining their current positions, which Vladimir Putin annexed in 2022. We're looking at the whole situation on the map, where we can see the really significant advances and breakthroughs of the Russian army in this area. As mentioned, we're in the southern part of the Donetsk region, and this is an area, we can see it here, the oblast border runs along here. Basically to the lower right of that, from your perspective. That is Donetsk. To the top left or to the left of that westward would then be Dnipropetrovsk. And what we just observed was the successful capture of Yalta on one side and Shevchenkov on the completely opposite side of the broader region. And we see it now, the Russians are steadily advancing closer to the border, or rather maneuvering along the border between these two oblasts, attempting to establish a solid foothold in the region, so that they can then, if politically decided, advance on a broad front towards the Kirovohrad Oblast with a clear and deliberate strategic intent. All these other small villages, we haven't marked them all anymore, but you can still see it. This is Zaporizhzhia village, which we just reported as captured yesterday. And here near Koma, there's a small village located just to the north of it, which was also captured. The map is still a bit conservative here, meaning it doesn't quite pick it up as quickly as we're now seeing from the Russian propaganda. That also always needs to be confirmed first. eLeaf State Map, a very pro-Ukrainian provider, then confirms the entire thing. And in that sense, It is the case that we can see the Russians advancing quickly and that Ukraine no longer has many areas under its control in the southern part of the Donetsk region. The situation in the center of Donetsk is different. Large cities there remain under Ukrainian control, such as Kostiantynivka, Pokrovsk, Sloviansk, or Kramatorsk. And in Kramatorsk, we've obtained footage that captures a new Russian assault on the city, and it's a very unusual attack. Kramatorsk also has an old military airport that was in operation until a few years ago, right up until the major war began. And now we're looking at a Russian propaganda video from the army channel Zvezda News showing the latest developments. Or Sylvester TV, which now shows us how this military airport is being attacked. And interestingly, and this is really quite new, we're seeing an attack here with a Shahed 136 drone. That is a large kamikaze drone, which is actually primarily used in the center of Ukraine because it has a range of 800 kilometers. Here it's being deployed at a very short distance, and the special thing is that it's equipped with its own camera for the first time. That means it can essentially, be steered and fine-tuned, the approach path targeting the airport in Kramatorsk as it continues to move forward. And now we're witnessing this approach of the drone as it's diving directly onto this shelter with precision. And I think it's already quite clear here that it's essentially a bunker standing here. And inside, we'll see it better in a moment, there are 3 vehicles that are stored there. It's most likely a drone position operated by the Ukrainian army. Here at the airport, now the approach from a different perspective, and that's exactly what I was saying, I don't even need to highlight it. That triangle over there, that delta we're observing, it's a large Shahed 136 equipped with a 50-kilogram warhead entirely on its own. So that's really a massive warhead that's typically deployed over hundreds of kilometers. Here, this Shahed drone is being used only about 30 kilometers from the front, precisely against this bunker. Now we're witnessing a precise strike right there, which would be absolutely devastating for the Ukrainian soldiers if they happen to be present at that exact moment. Here we see the 3 vehicles I just showed earlier. The bunker above it, meaning all that protective structure we just saw, has now disappeared. This means only these 3 vehicles are still here, completely burned out and visible. So this was truly a devastating attack on the Ukrainian soldiers, assuming they were actually present there and not, for instance, in the shelter in the protective bunker located a few meters away. All of this shows us that the Russians are indeed innovative when it comes to their kamikaze drones. As mentioned, they have further developed the Shahed so that it can now be guided to nearby targets with a camera. Yet it's not only the Russians innovating in methods and weapons, but also the Ukrainian army. We want to look at 2 examples. First, one that you might have seen before, but remains impressive each time, namely the use of civilian vehicles, small pickups, in these kinds of scenarios. In this case, even to fire thermobaric weapons, these are VM-8 rockets developed from the S-8 rockets, originally unguided rockets from helicopters, however, now modified in several ways. Firstly, so that they can be fired from the ground, enabling them to utilize more or less a ballistic trajectory. Secondly, so that they can be launched from a civilian pickup truck, which can move very quickly from point A to point B. And thirdly, and we're about to see this in terms of the explosion, these are in this case thermobaric weapons, which have this mixture, this chemical compound, that explodes and thereby generates an even stronger vacuum, resulting in an even more powerful explosion at the target every single time. We'll see the target now with the impacts clearly visible. These explosions are far more powerful than standard Grad rockets, for instance. So we can clearly observe that these VM-8 rockets are capable of causing significant damage. However, and this must be said because they actually come from the unguided Air Force sector, they were originally fired from helicopters at one point. They have a very limited range, some say 10 kilometers, though most estimates lean towards 5 kilometers, and that's of course extremely dangerous because the vehicle, as we just saw, it has to approach relatively close to the front, almost unarmored, and thus also comes within range of Russian drones. Nevertheless, it remains an option for Ukraine to deploy thermobaric rockets themselves as well. The second innovation we're going to take a closer look at is entirely groundbreaking and has no precedent, since Ukraine has for the very first time created its own. Glide bombs. Their own bombs are now in active use. Until recently, only the Russians had glide bombs like the FAB-500 seen earlier in action. And that the Ukrainians had up until now relied solely on Western bombs, such as the ASM-250 from France or the GBU-62 from the US, among many others. So basically bombs that are dropped, which don't have their own propulsion, but thanks to these structures and the built-in GPS systems and so on, can independently navigate to and hit their targets once they've been dropped. Ukraine didn't have anything like this at all. It didn't exist. And now we're seeing it here for the first time. Ukraine operating with its own glide bombs. I'll check if I can stop it at the right moment. It'll probably be very tricky. Nonetheless, we now see here that this glide bomb is being dropped by the aircraft, a Su-24, which we'll also see in a moment, and they actually work exactly like the Russian ones. They're dropped in such a way that first we can see quite clearly that it's initially just an old free-fall bomb, and then there's this large attachment on it. Those are the wings that will soon unfold. We'll shortly see the bomb rotate, which the Russian ones do in exactly the same way, and then it starts its approach toward the target. Let's take a look from different perspectives. In a moment, we'll also see it from the bomb's perspective, so to speak. In fact, a camera was mounted on it. And we can see that the bomb is now rotating, turning itself, so to speak, as we observe it. Right after the release, and now officially on its approach, and now we have a video that is supposed to prove to us that these bombs are already in use. From Novotroitsk in the Pokrovsk region in the east of the country, and as we'll see shortly, as I mentioned, that's just the evidence first. So it's a Su-24. That's also important for Ukraine, that they can use their own aircraft for this and not necessarily the F-16s or Mirages provided by the West. And this Su-24 is now dropping the bomb here. And here, as mentioned, the alleged first impact of one of these Ukrainian glide bombs or precision-guided munitions in Russian-occupied territory, specifically near Novotroitsk. We observe a secondary explosion. Apparently, ammunition stored there has been hit. And if the statements from Ukrainian bloggers are accurate, then this is, without any doubt, it signifies the very first deployment of a Ukrainian-made guided and glide bomb developed and produced in Ukraine. However, it must be acknowledged that much of it leverages the technology we've previously observed from the Russian side. Nevertheless, this has given the Russians an extreme advantage regarding their air force, and Ukraine is now trying to balance that out. Let's take a look at the map and see where the bomb hit, and we can pinpoint exactly where it struck because it was localized specifically in Novotroitsk. We can clearly observe Novotroitsk positioned roughly 10 kilometers behind the current front line when we examine it closely. The range of these bombs is reportedly around 60 kilometers. We mustn't forget, of course, the planes can't get too close to the front lines. They have to drop them from a high altitude to ensure they can glide a significant distance. Since they're glide bombs without any propulsion system, they must approach closer to the front lines. And if you want to strike 10 kilometers behind the front and you have a 60-kilometer range, you can accordingly approach the front to within 50 kilometers, which is already dangerous enough, because there are still many Russian air defense systems in operation, however far fewer than just a few years ago. In that way, the Ukrainers have prepared themselves with their drones and such. We just saw it yesterday, a Buk M3 system was destroyed once again. That so many air defense systems have been taken out, enabling them to now effectively strike along the front using their own glide bombs and air force capabilities. From the air, we return to the ground, eager to observe how the Ukrainian army is defending itself against Russian attackers. Here's a video that essentially shows us something we've seen quite a few times before. It's a new video. The special thing is that the video was published by the 414th, the attack drone brigade of the Ukrainian army, the first drone brigade that has just been established. It comes from this gentleman, Magyar, who is considered one of Ukraine's most important drone fighters. So far, he had a small unit called Birds of Magyar, so the Birds of Magyar, the little drones. Now he has his own brigade, the newly established 414th Attack Drone Brigade, which is deployed here and is about to demonstrate what it can do by repelling a Russian assault, which was carried out with multiple BMP-2 armored vehicles in the Donetsk region, specifically in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, where the fighting intensified. We're seeing the approaches here, and once again the entire attack is being destroyed. In the end, it's quite clear to see that we have 3 or 4 destroyed armored vehicles on the Russian side, and none of them managed to push through to advance further toward their actual target near Pokrovsk. We'll let it play out. Here it is. 3 or 4 wrecks that just exploded all at the same time. Here it is once more, quite clear to see. Now you can really observe it well. Here we have 4 armored vehicles, all of them completely destroyed and now entirely incapable of reaching their intended target, the Ukrainian front lines and the villages situated just behind them, because this 414th Attack Drone Brigade has now successfully proven to be highly effective in hunting down Russian vehicles as well. Next, we're heading to the Kursk region in western Russia. Here, just a few days ago, we observed a drone ambush on a road that specifically leads to Chotkino, a city that is being besieged on 2 sides by the Ukrainian army, and we actually have a video that shows us once again that exactly at the same location, on the same access road, on the ones placed there by Russia, these Dragoon 10s, and then on the barbed wire, that more and more Russian vehicles continue to pass through this increasingly narrow bottleneck. You have to drive through that exact spot, and all these vehicles, like motorbikes, are stopped by the Ukrainian drones hiding in the area, simply lying in wait to strike at any moment. until someone gets closer, and then they attack accordingly. So we're seeing the whole thing again. A very similar picture, but with new vehicles, as the next or first Russian army motorcycle steadily approaches this checkpoint, which was set up by the Russians, and here comes the next drone. We can see it relatively well here. The rotors are idling on both sides, indicating that the drone is now active, powered on, and actively scanning the surrounding area to detect if anyone is approaching. But the moment when someone approaches, as those motorcycles up ahead are coming, the drones take off and now go on the hunt for these Russian infantrymen, mechanized infantrymen. One must say, those who are approaching the town of Tyotkino, as mentioned, the whole thing is quite unique because it's always the same spot. And in a moment, the drone will show us the scenes we've already witnessed in the past few days, namely that a quad, for example, had an accident there. We had seen that due to this drone strike where additional motorcycles were destroyed, and now we're seeing the whole thing again from a different perspective. Here, as mentioned, the same scene, Russians kite setup. The Russian soldiers, when heading toward Kotkino, have to pass through this exact spot where they all get caught. That means all the Ukrainian drones are stationed here and there, waiting until the Russians come. And then they attack them accordingly. We see all the burning motorcycles that were attacked from different perspectives. We've trimmed out quite a bit, so we don't have to see the dead Russian soldiers shown in it. And this here on the right, we saw it yesterday or the day before. That's another quad that had already driven against it and was consequently destroyed. Also up ahead on the other side, which wasn't visible in the other video yet, a Kamaz truck of the Russian army was also taken out by a drone. That means we're actually dealing with a real vehicle graveyard here, always in the same spot, always at the bottleneck established by Russia, which the Ukrainians are using, crucial to emphasize again, within Russian territory, to stop the Russian supply routes to Tyotkino and make it even harder for the Russians, this small border town in Kursk, to defend. Finally, we want to take a look at anti-drone efforts, first from the Ukrainian side and then from the Russian side. And we start with the Ukrainian efforts, and once again we have the fact that these Mi-24 Hinds, which were also sponsored or gifted from various countries to Ukraine, that they are very actively engaged in intercepting the Russian drones, specifically the large Shahid drones. It's important to see this now because we're about to get a perspective, so to speak, from this helicopter where we'll see the firing range ahead. We have two things which we'll also see in the top right of the camera shortly. One is the pitot tube. That's the thing up there where the pressure is measured, from which one can then read, for example, the speed or the altitude. And the second thing, which we won't see right now but will experience in action, is the machine gun, which is mounted here below. Now we're about to witness this Mi-Hind as it heads out on a drone hunting mission. And all of this is captured from the perspective of the gunner, who's positioned up front in that first glass compartment over there. So here again, what I just said at the top right, that's the Bitoro. It doesn't shoot, so it's not a weapon, even if it looks a bit like one, but the weapon is located beneath us, if you will, and it's now actively firing at those incoming drones, which are of Russian origin and advanced design. We also see every time these are recordings that usually aren't during the day because the Russian drones take off at night and are supposed to reach their targets by morning at the latest in Ukraine. However, we also see that, yes, so the Ukrainian helicopters, we also see that this happened during rain, meaning we have all-weather operations and indeed a 24/7 operation of Hind helicopters that are hunting these kamikaze drones. In recent days, we've observed F-16s being deployed alongside numerous local mobile teams actively hunting down Shaheds or Geran 2 drones, as Russia calls them. There are simply so many of them that Ukraine has to mobilize every available resource, from Air Force units to ground-based defense systems and even their own kamikaze drones, to intercept these large Russian strike drones here. Finally, let's take a look at Russian efforts to, in turn, shoot down Ukrainian drones from the sky. This is crucial for the Russians and sadly very effective. We will now show the following recordings. Specifically, the Russians have these. They entirely replicated the technology from the Ukrainian side, where small quadcopters are programmed to ascend in large numbers and most likely utilizing radar data, intercept and collide with large Ukrainian surveillance or reconnaissance drones in the skies over Ukraine, effectively knocking them out of the air. We're seeing these images here. These are Shark M drones, meaning relatively large drones from the Ukrainian Air Force or the Ukrainian Army, deployed to scout out targets behind the front lines, identifying potential areas to strike using HIMARS, artillery, or smaller drones and similar tools. We can see there's an incredibly high number. I think we're about to watch a minute of this video now. It's actually even longer. And you really have to say that with these recordings too, if they're not computer generated, we now have, I would say, every week, at least one Russian video presenting us with around 50 to 100 kills, takedowns, or shootdowns. That means the Ukrainians also have an extremely high shortage or an extremely high potential of drones being shot down from the sky, so you can truly observe and analyze that they already need an enormous amount more just because of that, because so many are being lost. Here you can also see Army of Drones, so that's one of the manufacturers or one of the financiers of these drones, and you can see that many of them are actually replica 100 drones, which are now being attacked and taken from the sky. That means the Russians are also getting increasingly better at neutralizing or at least balancing this former Ukrainian air superiority, particularly when it comes to drones, by now actively hunting them down just like the Ukrainians do. And this shows, as we've repeatedly seen over the past 3.5 years, that both sides learn from each other. If one side introduces an innovation like glide bombs, Ukrainians copy it. If Ukrainians innovate, like small drones taking out large ones, the Russians will copy it too. And so it is very, very difficult for one side, it must be said clearly, for both sides to decide this war, because they are constantly adjusting to each other and constantly trying to copy the other side so much that the situation at the front, as we have seen, has changed notably in terms of villages, but not significantly in terms of entire regions or even the whole of Ukraine so far.